opportunity and for coming on, Mrs. Lawrence Rose. I am excited about hearing more about your topic.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Davis. All right, good afternoon, everyone, or whatever time it is in your neck of the woods. It is 6:15 p.m. in Bronx, New York. Okay, I'm going to be sharing my presentation. Okay, here it is. And it's forgiveness and its relation to happiness. Are you able to see the screen?
We're not seeing the presentation at the moment. Could reshare on the presentation.
Okay. Share my screen. And the presentation is here. Can you see it now?
Yes, we are seeing.
Okay. And now I put it in presentation mode. Can you see it still?
Yes.
All
Yes, we are
right.
seeing. Please go ahead.
Wonderful. So, forgiveness and its relation to happiness. Um, this is a big one, and it is a topic that we can never exhaust because every day it seems as if we are wounded in one way or the other. And if we do not know how to deal with woundedness, we develop forgiveness issues, and that invariable affects our happiness. And you may wonder why I start off with a slide um, of the family, because I want to position our happiness in the context of family life. And truly, the research shows, and experiences too, that forgiveness or unforgiveness is really grounded in a lot of our childhood development, what kind of parenting we had, what kind of children we were, what kind of issues we contended with, and how they were dealt with, how we were listened to, how we were cared for, how we were forgiven ourselves, and made free from some of the issues that we struggled with. So let's start off with the definition of abuse. And you may ask yourself, is there a relationship between abuse and forgiveness? Yes, there is. Abuse is to put to wrong or bad use, to do wrong to injure, to dishonor, to violate, to deceive, impose on, or take undue advantage of. And this is from the Webster's New World Dictionary. All right? So even as I say those words, to do wrong to injure, to dishonor, to violate, deceive, impose on, and take undue advantage of, I know that each and every one of us, the age that we are, we can identify some incident or another in which we were abused. Abuse occurs when one person manipulates or controls another person into doing with his or her body, mind, or spirit that which he or she does not want to do. All right, so this is force and control and going against one's will. Now, there are different forms of abuse. Let's look at physical abuse that has to do with the body. Attacking a child with implements, spoon, stone. I went to a funeral some time ago, and the gentleman, he was crying, he was in tears, and he was sharing that the only time he questioned whether his mother really loved him was, when she threw stones at him. And it really, she ran after him and threw stones after him, and it made him felt like She really didn't love him at that time. What implements do we use to attack our children? As Black people, we are coming from four parents who were severely abused during slavery. And because of this cycle of abuse, we find ourselves very, prone to abuse our own children. So sometimes we are correcting them, we just grab the nearest implement to use on them. And this hurts them in ways that, that we can't even begin to explain this evening. All right? Kicking, slapping, shaking, hair pulling, jerking, picking up by the extremities, head, arm, hair, pulling them really hard. Those are examples of physical abuse. When a child also witnesses abuse of another individual physically, it also comes off to them as physical abuse. The child's perception of painful or intrusive medical procedure is also perceived as physical abuse. So sometimes, for health reasons, we have to allow our children to go through some intrusive medical procedures. They have to get drip, so they have to inject them in the arm, and they have to either pull a tooth or something that is very, intrusive. And sometimes we have to hold them down when they're getting that shot. And all children are usually afraid of needles, right? But we have to hold them for the nurse to give them the shot. It comes across to them as abuse, unless, of course, we would have that conversation with them before and after the ordeal to let them know that it was necessary and it was done in love. All right? If the child is deprived of physical needs, we all know food, clothing, shelter, health care, that's another form of physical abuse. And when we threaten them with bodily harm verbally, we tell them we're going to box them down, we're going to kick them down, or we're going to, throw something at them. They experience that also in a physical way. Now, emotional abuse has to do with hurting their feelings. It comes off in verbal abuse by sarcasm, shaming them, name calling, criticizing them unkindly, or cursing. There is a statement that many Jamaican mothers used to use on their children. It says, "You are walkless like your papa," or "you coming like your walkless papa." And that's a form of verbal abuse. And sometimes we verbally abuse the children for things that their other parent or their missing parent have done to us as the other parent, right? That's a form of emotional abuse. Silent violence, glaring at them. Many of us grew up in church, and when we made mistakes, our parents would give us a look. That look? That, you're dead later, right? When you reach home, because they get that glaring look. Ignoring is also emotional abuse. They're talking to us and we are not listening, we're not responding. And we look hatefully at them sometimes. Over controlling and overprotecting is also a form of emotional abuse. Granted, we would have gone through painful experiences and we know what it might be like if the child goes through a similar experience. So, what we try to do is shield them from it without even explaining to them why. I would like to share that when I was maybe 16 years old, I started to believe now that I wanted to have a boyfriend, and I started to look at the pictures of guys or talk about guys with my friends and stuff like that. And we were sharing photos. And I shared this photo of this guy that I liked. And my mother found it. And believe you me, I almost died that night with the beating because my mother is a teenage mother and she got pregnant just about the same time that cycles continue in generations, right? Just about the same time I thought I wanted a boyfriend was about the same time she would have, started a relationship with my dad to get pregnant. So instead of talking to me about it, she started to, just punish me and kind of trying to change my mind, over controlling or over protecting me from that situation. All right. Neglect of dependency needs or filling the needs grudgingly. So we know our children have needs, but we neglect them. This is common with a lot of fathers neglecting their family, abandoning their children, but mothers and fathers do this. Or filling the needs grudgingly. We say, all right, see it there. All right, take it. But we're not really doing it from a heart of love. The child doesn't feel like, this is their right or is a parent's responsibility, but they feel like maybe they are just doing them a favor. Spiritual abuse, that's another one. When an adult makes his or her beliefs and values more important than a child's, so we feel like, we are God or Lord over our children, or whatever we have to do for church or, you know, Christianity, it is more important than a child's homework or their play that they are involved in at school or whatever the case may be. So we devalue them to make whatever we're practicing in our religion more valuable. This is a form of spiritual abuse and it pushes our children away from our religion. Posing to know or proposing to know what God's will for our children are in terms of their vocation. So we wanted to become a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, and we did not get to do that. But we feel like we can fulfill this dream through our child, our children. And so we pose like, this is God's will. And this is what, the Lord has told me to tell you that you should do. And, disobeying me is disobeying God. And all of these things that we use as Christian parents is a spiritual abuse. Also, when a religious caregiver abuses a child in any way, any one of the abuses I spoke about before, physically, emotionally, sexually, that is spiritual abuse. It's also physical, emotional, and and verbal abuse, but the child also experiences it in a spiritual way in that they turn away from God because it was done by a spiritual leader. Spiritual abuse is also saying to a child, Jesus does not love you when. That's a lie. Jesus always loves us. And so we should never tell them that God does not love them. God does not love some of the things that we do, and He never approves of sin, but He always loves us. Now, sexual abuse, inappropriate touching, kissing, hugging by an adult to a child, and also by an adult without a child, another adult's consent. Let's put it, because children cannot give consent to sex. But also, when we become of that age now, even if we did not give consent to sex or, sexual touching or stuff like that, it is sexual abuse if it is done without consent. Inappropriate touching, kissing, hugging of a minor. Okay, so we have to be careful how we touch, our minors, and as parents, we have to teach them about good touch and bad touch so that they know that from an early age from home, so they can identify it if they go anywhere and it is done to them. So there's a little thing that they used to do to children where they would take their hands and tickle them in the hand middle. That is very inappropriate and it's very suggestive, okay, of a sexual act. And so we're to teach our children not to allow these things to happen. I remember when I was younger and I was at church, there was this older guy who used to just play with my ears, and I never liked it. I didn't like it. Every time he came around, he would just play with my ears, and I really didn't like it. And I don't think at that time we were teaching about good touch or bad touch. And I didn't have the courage to say, stop doing that, or tell my parent, because as I was explaining about my mom, she was a kind of a strict person. So I didn't feel like I was comfortable to come and say this was happening, you know. But, I kind of developed the courage to kind of avoid the person as I grew, but I never liked it. So those of us who are on the line, males in particular, if there are little things that you do with children, you might think it's playful, but they perceive it as discomfort. Don't do it. Pat them on the shoulder, that's fine, you know, shake their hands or so forth. And if you can avoid touching them altogether, that's also fine. All right, but no sexual touching. Indecent exposure, exhibitionism. All right, so we have persons who are um, prone to this ill of exhibitionism, where they would go out and show their private parts to others. That's also sexual abuse. All right? Indecent exposure. Verbal abuse about sexuality. So we're telling them about their private parts and we're saying, well, your lips, they're too big, they're too huge, you tell them things about to make them feel badly about themselves and their sexuality. Oh, you are a tomboy to a girl, or you as a boy, you are too girly or stuff like that. So we make abusive statements about their sexuality. This is also sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is also sexual shaming a child by violating their privacy. Now, again, Black parents are very strict. And when it comes on to a child talking about privacy in their homes, it's like a no, because I pay the rent here and you're going to tell me about privacy? Listen, my children, they are 5 and 7, and they're telling me about privacy. They want their privacy and they deserve it. And they should be taught from this age that they should have their privacy. And when they're getting dressed, boy gets dressed in his room and girl gets dressed in her room, or if they share a room, they take turns, using the bathroom and getting dressed because they need to have their privacy, right? And by teaching them about privacy, we start to teach them, about being more sexually secure and being able to speak up about any incident of sexual abuse or shaming or violation of their privacy. Giving a child skewed information about sex is also sexual abuse. Because we don't want them to indulge, we would say to them, well, if you kiss somebody, you're going to get pregnant, right? I know it's not the age for these things, but we're coming from some dark ages where, some things were said to children to keep them from indulging in certain things. But now we know that the world wide web is there and their friends are there to give them information, some good, some bad, right? But we as parents should take the responsibility to give them correct information about sex. So when we give them skewed information about sex, that is also sexual abuse. When all of these things happen, our children develop feelings of shame, pain, fear, anger. And as I speak about these incidents, I want you also to reflect on your own childhood and your own journey. And if any of these things have ever happened to you, and you are experiencing any of these emotions as I speak, then you know that we have to look at forgiveness. Some of the fearful things that persons think about when they are abused are, I am going to die. He or she is going to hurt me. If I tell, they will come back and hurt me. If I trust, I will die. It is just a matter of time before it happens again. If I let him or her or them into my life, they will hurt me too. If I tell, something bad will happen. And so the fear factor becomes alive. There's feelings of abandonment. I am all alone and will always be alone. Some persons were abandoned. I can tell you about feeling abandoned. My father told me once when I was in high school to meet him somewhere in Spanish Town for my lunch money. And he told me where to wait, by which lady. She was a vendor. And I stood there and I waited. And I waited until the sun set. And it was getting dark and I had to go home. And he never showed up. He never showed up with the lunch money to this day. And I felt abandoned, you know. And it's a very hard, it's a very painful, it's a very lonely feeling not being able to be met, you know, to be received, to be cared for, to be loved. And this abandonment can follow people through life. So that if you did not forgive the person who abandoned you, whenever that feeling comes on again, it causes issues in your relationship. So abandonment makes you feel overlooked, rejected. They are not coming back. There is no one to protect me. And as far as thinking that God has forsaken you. So sometimes too, we see our parents, especially our fathers, in the position of God. And so when they abandon us or they treat us anyway abusively, we tend to think about God in the same way, which is incorrect. Shame. It was my fault. I enjoyed the abuse. So, for example, someone was raped, and if they had an orgasm, they may feel like it was my fault. I enjoyed it. Something, happened with me, and I'm dirty. Why did I, enjoy it? I felt pleasure, so I wanted it. And these are thoughts that people really contend with. I'm stupid, I'm ignorant, I'm an idiot, I'm a failure. I should have done something to stop it from happening. I allowed it to happen. I deserve it. I should have known better. I should have told someone I'm cheap. Because of what I allowed, I am bad, I'm dirty, I'm shameful, sick, nasty, disgusting. These are thoughts that circulate in people's mind over time when they are abused and when they are shamed. Tainted. Feel like you're damaged goods. Your life is ruined. I will never feel clean again. Everyone can see my shame, my filth, my dirtiness. No one will ever really be able to love me. So some persons who feel tainted go into relationships and they cannot understand why they cannot carry on relationships, because they go into the relationship with the psyche that they are already damaged and it's going to fail. The relationship is not going to work. And so these thoughts lead them down the same direction where their mindset is. Confusion. I cannot understand this. I am not loved in validation. I'm not needed. I'm not wanted. I'm not cared for. I'm not important. They do not need me. I'm worthless. I'm of no value. I don't matter in any way, and I should have never been born. The story is told of one young lady who she felt this way, invalidated, and she was expressing it to her mother. And she said, I feel like I could just kill myself. And her mother said to her, do you want a rope? That was like the greatest level of invalidation and abuse that a parent could, express towards a child who feels like they no longer belong on this earth. You are giving them the leeway to exit. Do you want a rope? So please be careful of the words that you speak over yourself and over your children, because when they go out there in the atmosphere, they cannot come back. But the Bible tells us that our words are powerful, and whatever we bind on earth is bound in heaven, and whatever we loose on earth, it is loosed in heaven. There are also feelings of powerlessness. I'm too weak to resist. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. Everything is out of control. I'm too small, too weak. I'm too helpless to do anything. People feel powerless because of abuse. There's hopelessness. It's never going to get any better. There's no way out. There's no option for me. The only way out is to run away. The only way is to leave this planet, like the young lady I mentioned before. And the only solution is death. And I'm just so grateful for our partners, Faith and Donovan Thomas, who have been working, so assiduously in this area to save so many from the pangs of death through their interventions with suicide interventions all over the world. Thank you so much, Donovan and Faith. So these feelings are like bottled up inside people. We meet people every day. We see their faces. Some of them wear a smile, but we don't know what kind of feelings are bottled up inside. There's confusion, invalidation, hopelessness, abandonment. There is illogical thinking, shame, pain, fear, anger. And sometimes we say we don't even know what we said or did, but the person just exploded, because all of this is like just a bomb, just needing that little fuse to be lit, and the person explodes. So they hide away. There are feelings of judgments, and there's a lack of honor. The commandment that says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Many have dishonored their parents because the abuse that they received was of a parental nature. But the thing is, the Bible never said, we're to honor our parents if they treat us well, or if they are kind to us, or if they don't abuse us. The law of honor is just honor. Honor your parents. I know I'm going to get some questions about that, but we are asked to honor regardless of what they have done. So we make inner vows. As a child, being abused, being, shamed, being invalidated, feeling hopeless, we say, I will never be a parent myself. I don't want any children. I don't want to get married. And we make vows, whatever they are. I never want to be like my mother. I never want to be like my dad. However, those vows, the enemy takes our words and he acts upon them. And he takes us back along the same cycle. And we're surprised to find out that the very same things that we vowed come full circle to face us in later life. And we are unable to move on. We're unable to be happy in all of our relationships because of some of these vows. There's bitterness. The Bible tells us that we are to be careful that not a root of bitterness is left, in us. We have to be careful about that. Something happens to us, we have to forgive and let it go, or there will be bitterness. And when bitterness takes root, it grows into a very strong and violent tree. So we have to get rid of bitterness. All right, so how does the happiness come in? Because all of what I just mentioned is sadness and the cycle of sin and how sin continues from generation to generation. Things happening in, our childhood, in our family line, and repeating. The Bible tells us about the sins of the father upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. So where does the happiness come in? It comes in through overcoming, because Jesus took all of our pain and our shame, our abandonment issues, our invalidation, all our tainted feelings, our confusion, our hopelessness. He took it with him to the cross. And we have to believe that what he did was sufficient for us. And we have to be free by overcoming through his blood and also through forgiveness. So what is forgiveness? Because after all of what I've said a while ago and persons experiencing all of that, how dare me to ask them to forgive their perpetrators? But it is necessary in order for us to have a happy life. Dr. Shapiro says, pain in life is inevitable, but suffering, on the other hand, is optional. So we have gone through pain. I shared some of my experiences with you, and I know you have your own. But suffering is optional. We don't have to go through the suffering with the pain. We can let it go. How do we let it go? We have unmet love needs. When we wanted to be loved, we were abused. And these leave our love cup empty. We have to ask the Lord to fill our cup with love. But we cannot be filled with love if there is hatred inside, if there is revenge, if there is, thoughts of abuse and suicide and all the things that we mentioned before. We have to forgive. I'm going to do a little demonstration, and this is a styrofoam cup, but I'm going to pretend like this cup is a love cup. Let's say everybody at birth was given a love cup, and it is your heart. Now, some things happen throughout life to damage our love cup. So, for example, some of the examples I gave you before, my father leaving me in the middle of a hostile town, waiting on him to come to give me my lunch money, and he never showed up. That put a puncture in my love cup. That child who felt that something was, they experienced an abuse, but they enjoyed it in some way. And there's this going back and forth in the mind about it. Was I really abused or did I enjoy it? They are punctured. When you tell them you're worthless like your papa, that punctures them. Whatever the abuse is, slapping, cursing, shaming, pretending to be God in the child's life, verbal abuse, all of them, it punctures our love cup. Now, for that young lady who the mother said to her, "You want to kill yourself? Here is the rope. We're going to take out the bottom of the cup for that one." Because it's as if there is no bottom left in the love cup. Now, can you imagine this person going around and desiring to be loved with a cup, a heart that has nowhere to hold the love? So let's say we're going to use some water, which we're going to call love this evening. And we're going to pour love into the love cup. And what do you think is going to happen? Of course, it's not going to remain. The water is going to run out. When we receive the Lord Jesus as our Lord and Savior, and we ask Him to come and heal our wounds, all of the abandonment and the neglect issues, all the pain and the shame and the confusion, the invalidation, everything that we struggle with, we also ask Him to give us a new heart. And symbolically, this is what He does. He covers us with His righteousness. And we now have a new heart. We have a new experience. We have a new mindset because He gives us the mind of Christ. And now with our new heart, with our new love cup, when love is poured into us, what do you think is going to happen? Not only does it stay, it runs over. And that's where we have enough, not only for ourselves, but to share with others. And this part of the demonstration, I recognize it the last time I presented. Do you notice that after a while, the old self disappears? And I guess if we keep pouring the love in, it just takes its time and goes. And we soon forget about it. The old wounds. Sometimes we have been wounded and we don't let it go. But when we're healed of those wounds, and when God comes in and when the happiness comes in, then we don't even remember the old wounds anymore. And so that is really the connection of happiness and forgiveness. Because if we leave our love cup empty, we are succumbing to all those abusive treatments, that the enemy would have thrown at us. But if we ask God to fill our love cups and to take the old heart from us, He will indeed give us a new heart. I could stop the presentation here, but there is a little more. Hate replaces anger, and we are a new person. The Bible tells us in Ephesians 4:32, "Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. So, forgiveness is often defined as an individual, voluntary, internal process of letting go of feelings and thoughts of resentment, bitterness, anger, and the need for vengeance and retribution towards someone who we believe has wronged us, including ourselves. So, sometimes we have to forgive ourselves. Remember, forgiveness is individual and it is voluntary. Sometimes, too, when children hurt each other, we put them together and we say you are sorry. That is not true forgiveness. We have to talk with them and help them to come to a place where they realize what they did was wrong and what was wrong with what they did. And so they will learn how to be compassionate and empathetic. And in so doing, they will voluntarily apologize to the person. But sometimes we don't have the time to go through all of that, so we just say you're sorry. But that's not true forgiveness. Human forgiveness, which is our forgiveness, it is superficial. Today I forgive you, but if you step on my toe tomorrow, you are back in my bad books. It is conditional. Well, I forgive you if you forgive me. That's human forgiveness. It's self-seeking. We want to have our own way. And it's changeable. All right? But divine forgiveness it's at the heart level, as I just demonstrated. It is unconditional, comes from God. It is self-emptying, right? We have to search our hearts and some things that are hidden there that we have locked away, put up maybe 2 or 3 locks on them and we're never revisiting that. We have to empty ourselves in order for God to really forgive those wounds. Our divine forgiveness is unchangeable. So when God says he forgives us, it doesn't change. Even if we change, his forgiveness remains the same. So in order for Jesus to forgive my sins, to forgive my sins, Jesus identified with my sins as if they were his own. He took my place as he gave up his own life, which is a price of sin, that I may be freed from the obligation to die for my own sins. He never had any sin, but he took my place because he wanted me to live, so he died. So to forgive as Jesus forgave, I must own my hurt. This is validation. Don't tell the child that, sure, you're not hurt, man. Where you going so far? You're hurt. How are you feeling? What is the hurt? Help them to identify the hurt and the pain that they are feeling. Own it. Identify with the wrong act of that person who hurt you by recognizing that you and I are capable of doing a similar deed. When we put ourselves in a judgmental place, like that could never happen to me and I could never have done that, it's only by the grace of God why we are able to continue as we are, as good people. But we must see ourselves as capable of doing a similar deed if it was not for the grace of God. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and it is desperately wicked. Who can know it? So when we are asking for forgiveness, we have to come to God as a representative of the individual. What did you say now? I must come to God in prayer like a representative of the individual. How is this done? We have to ask God to put his forgiveness in our hearts for the person. And an example of how we come to God as a representative of the individual is from 1 Samuel 25:24 and 28, where Abigail said to David, my Lord, let the blame of my husband, and her husband was Nabal, let his wrongdoing be on me Please forgive your servant's offense. And if you know the story, Abigail did nothing wrong, right? She was guiltless of whatever offenses, but her husband was guilty. She took a peace offering and she went to meet David and she said, let his blame be upon me. And that's how we come to God as a representative of the person. Deep, right? After the person did that to you, you must come to God as a representative of the person and say, let his blame be upon me. Yes, that is what true forgiveness looks like. Paul said about one of his disciples, if he has done you any wrong or owes you anything, charge it to me. That's an act of forgiveness. How do you know you're forgiven someone who has hurt you? The feelings of resentment disappear. You no longer see them and want to walk on the other side of the road. All right? There's no longer a strain in the relationship. You can see them and say hello, hi, and how are you, and really mean it. To remain in a forgiving frame of mind, self must be crucified. So, self will raise up itself and remind you that that person did that thing to you and it was so grievous. But you continue to crucify self and ask God to give you a heart of forgiveness. And how do you relate to the one that you have forgiven? Seek to do what will be best for the individual. You're going to ask God for guidance. Ask God to put his unconditional love in your heart for the individual. Some of the joys of forgiveness. It is often difficult to foresee that transgressions or old triggers can make us feel resentful and angry. So it helps to apply the balm of forgiveness as a preventative measure, as a form of investing in yourself and a more peaceful future. So this is from positive psychology. Often it's going to be difficult for us to see that old triggers, our transgressions are going to make us feel resentful and angry. So what we're going to do is put that in practice and start to rehearse within our minds, how we will treat with certain situation, other preventative measures we'll put in place so we can invest in ourselves for a more peaceful future. What kind of persona, disposition we want to have when we are offended, and we practice it. And we keep a little journal and we have a journey to see how good we're doing. The pet peeves that we have that we never wonder, why is it? I remember one of my friends saying, when it came on to a certain time of the day, she started to feel so down. She started to feel so discouraged. She started, if somebody was there trying to get her attention, she just want to be her by herself and so forth. And she remembered that it was during that time of the day that her father left. Like, he just packed up and left the family. So it just came to her. She was an adult now, and at that time she just recognized that during the reason she was like that and she couldn't explain it was because of that one incident. So it takes a lot of self-work. It takes a lot of spending time with ourselves and understanding ourselves and what makes us triggered and why. So putting measures in place to mitigate even against our own actions when we are triggered and when others trigger us as well. De Blasio emphasized willful decision making and forgiveness that is based on willpower. So this is a decision making model, which is forgiveness is defined as the cognitive letting go of resentment and bitterness and the need for vengeance. So we have to reason it out in our minds, and there are persons like that who have to just reason it out. I'm going to do this because God tells me. And even nature for those who may not believe in God. Nature tells me that when I let go, when I release negativity and bitterness, and abuse, I give space for goodness, and happiness to come in to take the place of that emotional place, pain and hurt. Now there's emotional forgiveness, because we all know how the emotions are bruised. Like that gentleman I told you about, when his mother threw the stones at him, he felt emotionally, torn. But when emotional forgiveness is complete, the person will have replaced negative emotions associated with unforgiveness, like anger, resentment, and vengefulness, with positive emotions like empathy, compassion, sympathy, and altruistic love. So this is another intentional approach where we trace, we track, we document the negative emotions that we are feeling. There's anger, there's resentment, there's vengefulness. So we're going to ask God to help us to replace these with compassion, with sympathy, and with altruistic love. One of my favorite movies is Les Miserables. I can't even pronounce it. Les Miserables. It's a French movie, and the the star, he was sent to prison for a loaf of bread. His family was starving, and he went out. He broke into a bakery and he stole a loaf of bread, and he was sent to prison, and he spent his entire life as a young man in prison, becoming hardened. When he came out, a number of things happened, but one thing that changed his life forever was that he spent the night at the house of a priest, and he was robbing them of all their valuables in the night and leaving. Anyway, he left, and he was caught by the police, brought back to the house. And when he was brought back, he thought that surely the good man of the house would send him to jail. And you know what the priest did? He took some more valuables and said, "You forgot these, my friend. Here is some more. Take it. Have a good life. You're forgiven. Take the good and the chance, the opportunity that you have given, the forgiveness, and go and do likewise." And that eliminated the darkness from his soul, and the vengeance that he had to go back and harm those who put him in jail and did all this wrong to him for just a loaf of bread. I mean, that's a lot to carry, for any individual to waste your whole life in jail. But because of the love of someone else, he was able to receive happiness and goodness and altruistic love. Forgiveness is a process. Enright and Fitzgibbon believe that all three aspects of forgiveness need to change, and these are the cognitive, the affective, that have to do with the emotions, and the behavioral, if a person is to fully forgive. And so everything is a holistic change that needs to take place, and it's a process. They argue that the person must have a form of emotional readiness to forgive, because before they are likely to be receptive to forgiving. Sorry for the distraction. All right, so benefits of forgiveness. By mentally switching between thoughts of goodwill and holding a grudge, blood pressure, heart rate, muscle tension increased, while feelings of control linked to mental toughness is reduced. All right, so let's say that again. By mentally switching between thoughts of goodwill and holding a grudge, blood pressure, heart rate, and muscle tension will be decreased, while feelings of control linked to mental toughness is reduced. All right, so this is from positive psychology again. It is proven that these activities will prevent us from getting further ill health. Excuse me 1 minute. Sister Dainty, I'm online. I'm on a live. Okay, leave the things and Pastor and I will pack them, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. Mental benefits of forgiveness training include increased optimism. So when you train yourself to be forgiving, there is increased optimism, there is self-confidence, improvement, there's compassion, there's reduced stress and spiritual inclination. So all the data is showing us that some of the ill health that we suffer from, sometimes cancers, sometimes, heart problem, you name it, stress, high blood pressure, cholesterol problem, because we're eating all this bad food because we want to feel comfortable, but there's something that we need to deal with. And so there's a direct link sometimes to our health and unforgiveness. So we have to look at that link and see if it applies to us and deal with it. Release, people. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord. And God is not a liar. He honors his word above his name, and he will avenge anything that has happened to any of his children. And it doesn't matter what it is, he will avenge you in time. Believe him, have faith, and watch him work. And just do what he says. Forgive as you have been forgiven. When they crucified him, we're now in the season of Lent, and we're reflecting on that, journey from Golgotha, from the place in the Garden of Gethsemane to the place of skull. And Jesus, when he would have received all the ills of mankind, when they did everything that they could have done to him. And some of us, we think it was just something simple. And some of the imagery, some of the movies, they don't aptly describe what he went through as that slaughtered Lamb of God. It was emotional, it was physical, it was sexual. Remember that when he was on the cross, he was naked, That's indecent exposure. And sometimes they act movies and they make him look so nicely dressed, even in his nakedness, right? You're not really seeing anything, but he was naked. He was naked. He was mocked. He was unfairly treated. He was massacred. He was crucified for you and I. And what did he say? Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing. And he meant it. And he released them of everything that they did to him, because in essence, he had come to sacrifice himself for the sins of the world. So, my presentation has frozen. But there are so many other benefits of forgiveness. And so I encourage you, my friends, wherever you are, to tap into the benefits of forgiveness. Forgiveness is intricately tied to our happiness. And it won't happen overnight. It's a process. So I encourage you, I charge you that we take this work of forgiveness seriously, and we see, for ourselves how, by trusting the process of forgiveness, how our happiness will be magnified, how it will be increased, how we'll be more genuinely be more happy, how we will not, be so easily offended. We would be healed of many emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, all of these ills by one simple act of forgiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not here proposing that I am a forgiveness expert, because I do struggle with some of these things myself, but I have proven that letting